My name is Troy Lovett, and I'm with Carrie Daniels from the University of Louisville, and this is the third session with Jim Miller in his home in Louisville, Kentucky. Today's date is March the 20th, on a beautiful spring day, 2009. So, Jim, we left off in our last session, session number 2, with you beginning to coach at Flaget High School with the legendary Paulie Miller. So let's start there today and talk a little bit about Flaget. And the first question I would ask you is, what was it like to work with Paulie Miller?
Well, the best thing you could say was that it was almost every day was an adventure. Paulie was one of the most unique people that I've ever known. He grew up in very, very poor family situation. As a matter of fact, he was a baby of a big family, and matter of fact, he had to lay out of grade school a couple of years to take care of his mother, but she was totally blind, and that was kind of his background. He played all sports and was pretty doggone good in every one of them. He played halfback, running back in football. He was a forward in basketball, a catcher in baseball, and he was one of these he was a fierce competitor. He'd almost do anything. One of the funniest things I can ever remember having, I didn't actually see this, I saw it, I don't remember it, but back in 1938, Paulie's a senior at St. X. Emmanuel High School had, I don't know whether you remember, but they had what was a mythical national championship team that year. They beat a team from Connecticut, New Britain, Connecticut, that they played and claimed a national championship. And they were a very, very good football team. And in this game against Emmanuel, St. X, of course, was the underdog, and it was a close game at the time. And Paulie intercepted a pass, or at least he got in, but he got it going anyway, but juggled it. And he was going down the field juggling the ball, and he covered about maybe 10 or 15 yards without actually getting possession of the ball, and then finally dropped it. And when he dropped it, he went face down and he dropped the ball. And he just started biting the ground. I mean, he was literally tearing the ground out. And I just thought that was so typical of Paulie Miller. I mean, he was just such a fierce competitor. His background, as far as coaching was concerned, was he went into the Navy in the Naval Air Corps, and was in naval pre-flight training at University of Iowa. And Iowa pre-flight out there and they were playing intercollegiate football at the time, basketball too, I guess, and competing very, very favorably with all the Big Ten and everybody. And the coach out there one of the coaches was Coach Wilkinson, and later on of Oklahoma fame. And a fellow by the name of Don Farrow, who had been coaching at Missouri and was the perpetrator of the split T formation. And the split T formation is, well, I don't know why somebody don't try to resurrect it right now, but it was a very ingenious formation at the time. And so Paulie played under them, and did very, very well. He washed out as a pilot, and I don't know exactly. I know he got his degree at the University of Louisville. I know that, but that's his background in playing. Originally, he graduated from St. X and went to Moorhead on a scholarship to Moorhead to play ball, and went on in the service like everybody did then. And so that's his background. And then there used to be a an alternative school or reform school, if you want to call it that. It was by the name of Ormsby Village here in Louisville. And it was located out there along in your neck of the woods. Do you remember where the old Kentucky Military Institute?
I sure do.
Well, it used to be Ormsby Village too.
KMI, yeah.
If they left there. Ormsby Village had a chaplain by the name of Maloney, Father Maloney, who was the founder of Boys Haven, which is, of course, still operating, to this day. But he was the original founder of it, built it up, and of course the model was Boys Town from out in Omaha. And anyway, Paulie was seemed to be under his wing most of the time. And when they had an athletics program out there at Ormsby Village, he got Paulie to coach the team, and that's what Paulie was doing. They kind of maintained kind of a junior varsity schedule as far as football is concerned. But anyway, that's the way things started off. And then I've got to digress a little bit when you start talking about his coaching at Flaget, because everything was very unique there at Flaget. Flaget was archdiocesan school, and owned by the archdiocese and the bishop. And he made no plans at all for any extracurricular activities, sports or anything else for that matter. He made no plans for it at all. And it's down in the deep West End down there where athletes were a dime a dozen. And some of the business people from down that end of town couldn't see that this school was there without having a sports program. Now, actually how it took place, I don't really know, but the ramrod was a fellow by the name of Reed Doyle, who was a representative of, at that time, National Car Rental, and a fellow by the name of Ed Roby, who was the owner of Delaney Cleaners, and also had right on the corner out at 23rd and Oak Street in Parkland area, or on the edge of Parkland. Had the whole corner there, and there was a cleaning establishment and a tavern and a restaurant, and all of it right there, and he owned all that. Avid sports guy, and backed all kinds of teams in major fall cities, basketball here, and all that kind of stuff. And they got together and formed an organization, a corporation called the Flageteers, and they financed and backed an athletic program at Flaget High School. And that's the way the thing, I've never heard of anything like it before or since. Boosters clubs and everything like this, but this was a complete separate entity in itself from the school. Of course, they answered to the school. I mean, they couldn't do anything, they still had to answer to the Archbishop or to his representative. And but that's the way it was. And so when this thing first got going, Paulie, of course, had played on some of these teams that Ed Roby had backed, and they asked him to come to coach. Now, he wasn't the first coach down in Flaget. The first coach down there, as far as football was concerned, was a fellow by the name of Herb Jeffries. Now, Herb Jeffries was a legendary athlete from around Louisville down here, and played some Major League Baseball and also from some pro football. And I'm going to not venture who that might have been, because I'm not really sure who the teams were he played with. I mean, he was the very first coach down there. And so they started off, the first year they had a freshman team, and then when they had freshmen and sophomores, they had a junior varsity team. And I think they started playing varsity football when they still only had 3 classes. First year there was a freshman class, then a freshman, sophomore, and then went, right up like that. And one of the first ball games they played, they managed to get a Manual on the schedule, and Manual beat them something like 60-0. And so I think possibly the first football team possibly might have been the season of 1944. I know they had a team in 1945 because that was that big game that Manuel walloped them so badly. It was in 1945. And so I'm getting you back, kind of set the date here a little bit. Flaget had their freshman class the year I was a senior at St. X. And the first class was in Holy Cross School at 32nd and Broadway. That's where they had their first classes. Then they moved up to what was a mansion, and I should have got that. I could have got that. There was a big old West End mansion, 3 floors, belonging to the Whalen family, and that's where Flaget began, in those classrooms in that big old house. At any rate, Paulie, Herb Jeffries for some reason was going to leave or not be there anymore, and so Ed Roby and the guys from, of course, Father Maloney and everybody else, they tapped Paulie to be the first coach, and he coached everything that they had a team in. He coached football, basketball, baseball, track, and that was about all there were in those days. And so that Paulie's first year of coaching football was in 1946, and the biggest thing they did that year was St. X was touted to be one of the better teams in the state that year and everything, and Paulie beat them. Beat them 13-12. Beat them on an extra point, and had a pretty successful year that year. And Paulie had an assistant coach by the name of Bonnie Washer, and Bonnie Washer had graduated from Xavier University and got the opportunity to go back up there and coach at St. Xavier High School in Cincinnati. And they're not related in any way except by name. They have different order of brothers that owns them. And so Paulie, after their first year, that's when Paulie was then by himself again. And I think you already have a story of how he came to me, and I was managing a baseball team for him down there and got thrown out of the park, and he decided that he would like to have me be his assistant coach. So for the first couple of years down there, it was just the two of us that coached the team. And so Paulie and I, we went to the same grade school together. Now Paulie's 5 years older, was 5 years older than me, and but we were, had known him. He wasn't that far ahead of me as far as school was concerned. He's only 38, 39, probably. Well, he's about 3 years ahead of me in school, and so we knew one another. Now that brings us actually to start coaching now, and so Paulie was great on organizing and keeping the coaches and all thinking the same way with it. Just almost one great big staff meeting the whole time football season. And I had my way of thinking things, and Paulie had his way of thinking things, and there were times that we rarely would see eye to eye, and I know people would come they say, we just go to see a Flaget football game to watch those two Millers battle on the sidelines. But you could not get along with Paulie by being a yes man to him. If he said, you really think it's to work? Yeah, that would work, Paulie. If you didn't think it would work, he wanted you to tell him that. He wanted him to tell you why and everything, but of course I had my opinions, and I was a line coach, and he did the backs and ends, and of course it was his system too. And I must admit that the first year that I was down there, that I was very antagonistic towards the system because I was a single wing guy, sure. And I'm into a situation where they had a term called brush blocking back in those days, and as one of the things that I told him, I said, I don't see any reason why we can't, or why we have to brush back this guy. We can just as easily put a shoulder into him and really knock him. And we kind of added that to the thing. But there was so many things that Paulie was, he talked about how it was to be with him. I'll just give you a couple of examples. Paulie would have a situation that would come up, and on the blackboard it would just be great. The problem is a lot of times when you transfer from the blackboard to the field that there could be some great big guy that's sitting there that, you're supposed to be, you can do him with a piece of chalk, but he's awful tough when he's standing there. And so we were playing, I don't know whether I told you this before or not, but we were playing a team from Cincinnati. It was Roger Bacon High School in Cincinnati. And we'd been there 2 or 3 years by now, and as a matter of fact, when we run that the option play, and the team wanted to stop that very quick handoff and everything. What they run against us was they ran an 8-man front with all 8 down linemen, and if you can picture a center and three linemen on either side of him, and then a defensive man on each gap. 4 guys on each side. Each one of them was in each of the 4 gaps on each side of the center. They had a guy, and this guy would just what we call knifing into the inside. Well, the thing all you had to do was to just let him go to the inside and knock him on further into the inside and run the wide stuff. But I hope you can picture what I'm getting at now. I say, I'm the center. Here's the big guy off my shoulder here, and another guy off my shoulder here. It'd be a little hole right here, see? And so we had a play that went directly right up the middle, but it involved a fake to the outside, and everybody starting to the right, and then the fullback would counter back to the left. A little misdirection play. Right up the middle, right where this hole was. And on the blackboard, very simple situation. Here I'm the center. All I gotta do, I block out on this guy that's already out here on my shoulder out here. And this guard right here, he just drops back and with cross block. So the center's got an angle this way, the guard's got an angle that way. Here's the play. Nobody back here, no linebacker. Well, he decided this play wanted to work, and it so happened that these 2 guys that were playing these 2 guards here were they were monsters. And we just weren't getting them moved out there, And I said, he keep banging that play up in there and banging that play up in there. And we'd finally be like 3rd and long. And so then he'd go ahead and run the option outside, we pick up 15, 18 yards, and he'd be back in there banging that play in there again. And so we're nose to nose. We're nose to nose in there, And I'm saying, why do you call this play? Okay, well, if you had a lineman that could block this guy down there, Well, this is a typical situation. Finally, in the second half of the ball game, we finally broke that play. We finally knocked this guy out and cross blocked, and the guy went up the chute here and scored a touchdown. Went about 40 yards, and then he was okay. And he was ready to play a game more that night, But he was so far ahead of his time in almost everything. And I got to admit that my contribution as far as tactics and things like that was merely, in all the 13 years I was down there, was primarily just a refinement of putting a practical application to what he wanted to do. And then I would figure out a way, of course, that we would work out the blocking and things like that. But he was a marvelous organizer. He had a knack on being able to prophesy, so to speak, of what the end defense was going to be, so that we were generally prepared in our opening game of the season. We generally were pretty well prepared with what we were going to be running up against. He had a very efficient scouting session system, and we were one of the first ones to use professionally made movies, for study. And he was an adventure, like I said, to be around.
From a philosophical standpoint, it must have been a lot of pretty serious discussions with the single wing and the split T. So how did he convince you, or did he convince you, that what was his method of saying this is superior to the single wing?
Well, towards the end of the first year I was down there, I was able to start to recognize the merits of what they were trying to do. And by the time we rolled around into the second year, I was a devout T formation guy, a split T formation. Sometimes when we got a little chance, a little chalkboard or something, I could show you how ingeniously simple it was. Yeah. And I found out that the single wing, as I knew it, was such a complex thing. I really don't know whether you could just get anybody to operate a single wing the way the Tennessee single wing without having it steeped in tradition, for several years behind it, because it was really complex. Yeah. I'm talking about just the simple exchange from center to the, very complex. And the blocking was equally complex. And whereas most of these things turned out to be very, very simple with the T formation, because with the split T particularly, the function of the play itself would almost do the blocking for you in some cases. And it all boiled down, if you can visualize. Now I'm a quarterback, okay, and you got the full house T behind you back here, and everything started off with just a straight dive play with this left halfback or right. But the left half, I don't have any room because I guess the left halfback driving straight ahead, and the quarterback was just a straight handoff. The difference was that I didn't want to ever say anything about it, but I always thought that we might even have an illegal situation here, because the quarterback would take the ball, and instead of stepping straight down the line or to spin out and everything, his first step was forward. And actually, he was on or front of the line of scrimmage when he made the handoff over here. So, technically, that if he's over the line of scrimmage and you hand the ball forward, that's like a forward lateral. So, but anyway, that's what it was. Everything started on as soon as the quarterback took his first step, he's already made a gain. And so there'd be this dive play, give it to the halfback. The second play will be halfback going up through there, fullback coming and running the next hole out. Would be the second man through. Fake to the halfback, give to the fullback. The next play out was fake to the halfback, fake to the fullback, keep the ball, and option the end. That was and then there was a pass play off of each one of them. And the counter play I told you, where he faked left, dive right with the fullback. So you hit all of the holes. Each one of them had a play action off of it for passing, and it was ingenious. It was ingenious.
Did he embellish the Bud Wilkinson system, or did he copy a lot of that he found out there?
Oh, it was just almost a copy of it. There wasn't much. There was some additions to the thing. But primarily,
just straight out.
Yeah, we added some of our own little things to their blocking patterns and things like that. But we added a play that didn't have anything. We added a play, what we call just a quick pitch out play, where the quarterback took the ball and took a quick spin and gave it to right halfback running right. You know, you've seen them all do it.
Yeah.
Except they do it differently now. You're waiting for things to happen. All we do is run him out there, and we'd have him out there, and he'd have the ball, and be outside everybody before anybody, and they had the tackle to be out there with him. And that, you know, but most of the time it was pretty thing that stopped it. The thing that stopped the split T was when they started putting up 9 men up on the front on the line. As long as they were in an 8-man front, you know, 5-3, 6-2, something like that, everything was right. When they started putting 9 men up there into like 5-4s and that type of thing, then there was an extra man out there that you had to block him instead of optioning.
Yeah.
There's an extra man out there, and that's what slowed it up. Other than the fact that I don't know any other reason, to tell you the truth.
Did Manual, for example, St. X, were they running the same thing against you?
No, none of them run that.
Okay.
We were the only one around here for a long time. They all had all different things of the different T formations that they most of them were well into the 60s before anything like any other option, the belly series or any of that stuff ever showed up. Paulie was so innovative on so many things that I mean, for example, it was I can think in my later years, last 2 or 3 years, where we actually did onside kicks on the opening kickoff. Mm-hmm. And we also had a situation where, when we had Hornung particularly, where we get into a punting situation, and we line up in a regular T formation, but we just drop the fullback straight back into a punt formation. It's just a little bit of a different blocking situation, but the quarterback stayed right up under the center. And if we kicked the football, I mean, he passed the ball right back through the quarterback's legs too. But the quarterback could take it if he had to. So a lot of times we would go, if we were particularly in our own territory, we'd line up in that punt formation, and Hornung would be there at the quarterback, and depending on what they did, I mean, if they stayed up tight, then we'd go ahead and kick the football. And sometimes you get the kick and the roll. I mean, you know, you get 60 yards, sure. You know. And then if they didn't, if they went on back into the punt formation, then Hornung could take the ball and do something with it.
Well, that sounds a little like
some of the biggest gains off of that particular formation, of all the formations, was that all of our quarterbacks, but particularly Hornung, had the option of, when they line up under center, they say they call a sweep to the left, or option play to the left. And they line up under center, and then we got a big wide gap up here. Because the guys, you know, the guards would be almost a yard out from there, you know. And if they got it with the guys on the outside, a big gap up there, and no linebacker back there, Hornung would just take his hands and tap the center. And everybody else going to be running this other play, but he in the center knew it was going to be a quarterback sneak. And I mean, Hornung scored from 20 yards out on a quarterback sneak a lot of times. And these were all Paulie's innovations that he worked out. And but you can see, I don't understand why those kind of things aren't done nowadays.
Exactly.
Maybe they are, but you just don't hear anything about it. We had a situation where we put 2 quarterbacks under the center. Both of them had their hands up under there, and we gave it to one or the other. Now they made a rule against that when they finally said the second guy could be upper, but he couldn't put his hands in there. He had to be, and so I'm just trying to say we had during the days when we were smaller than anybody else, you know, when we were underdogs all the time, and we had to take chances. We had to do all kinds. We had our 20 fake right fumble. I mean, it was, I told you about the counter play up the thing. Well, it was, he'd make a fake over here and come back over here, and everybody a hard ball, and they'd start scrambling for the ball. And of course, Hornung, or the quarterback, would just bootleg it, sit behind his back and go back, you know. And we've had that to work. So I'm trying to get the basic philosophy of what we had to do when we only had 30 ball players and all of them smaller and everything. We were still beating people.
There you go.
And that's the way it did. You know, that if your people are as good as their people, then you can play standard. You can play standard football. If your people aren't as good as their people, you got to try to fool them. And so that's. But we were so always prepared. Staff meetings. Immediately after every ball game, there'd be a staff meeting usually for about an hour, and then sometime usually Sunday. Then there'd be the film. See the film and another meeting. So during the season, it was very intense, and then of course, then later on, we ended up with a full staff. I mean, we ended up with, like five men, 5 or 6 guys on the coaching staff.
Who were some of those, Jim?
Well, we had almost all of them were St. X graduates for a while. Later on, U of L graduates. Chubby Heitloff graduated from St. X 43 the year after me and was the captain of U of L's football team back under Frank Camp. A fellow named Maurice Brodsky, who played football at Xavier before he went in the Marines. When he came back, he finished up at the University of Louisville and became a longtime teacher at Flaget, and his wife, and they have big, successful colonial designs in here. That's what he did. And then another U of L graduate, he wasn't a local guy, but a fellow named Gene Sartini was my assistant, and he went over to Providence High School and has been over there for 150 years and still coaches at Providence High School, U of L graduate, and had a one-time record of reception as an end for U of L. He held a record for completed passes. Let me see who else. Jeep Choir was another one. He was St. X guy. Ended up being one of the early successful coaches at Trinity after he left Flaget. He's gone now. He's deceased. And I think, well, that give you an idea. So,
Jim, during that era, obviously Bear Bryant was at UK, and one of my favorite athletes of all time was Babe Pirelli. So, in what sense was Bryant influencing high school football, or someone like Pirelli who was so outstanding? How did that figure into?
Well, Coach Bryant was his personality was so magnetic. Had you ever had a chance to ever know him, or
no? No.
Well, I got a awfully good chance to know him very, very well, as a matter of fact, and because he spent a lot of time in later years, he spent an awful lot of time at Flaget. And matter of fact, at one time when Hornung was graduating from high school, he says, if you give me Paul Hornung, I'll give a scholarship to your entire football team. Well, he meant, to the 2 starting teams. And Hornung wanted to go there. That you can go to the bank on that. He wanted to go. His mother didn't want him to go. His mother wanted him to go to Notre Dame, of course. But he wanted to go to Kentucky, and he was going to go to Kentucky when one of the Notre Dame guys grabbed him and stashed him away someplace up at some hunting lodge or camp somewhere and wouldn't let anybody get at him. And because that's what they did with Snellenberger. I mean, that's what Kentucky did with Snellenberger. There was a couple other ones strong after Snellenberger when he got out of Flaget. And the UK guys put him up around one of them coal mines or somewhere. Because they just buried him and he couldn't get away. But Bryant was such a down-to-earth guy, and he could, when he came into a crowd, or he came into a room, I mean, he was like a chameleon. He could just blend in with whatever the mood of that room was, whatever the mood of that group of people was, or whatever whatever it was, he could become one of them just like that. And he was so personable that, you know, you just couldn't hardly refuse not to want to play for him. Now, once you got there, he was brutal. Boy, I mean, you know, he didn't mess around with you when you got up there. But that, you know, that's the way that, you know, that's just the way things were back in those days. A wonderful person. And back when he was after Hornung and Sykes and 4 or 5 other guys, as a matter of fact, he would come to Louisville, and I-64 wasn't in existence. You had to come in, you know, 60 on Shelbyville Road, and I lived at a little house right on Wallace Avenue. I lived a block and a half off of Lexington Road. And he'd come in there and he'd stop by our house. And he loved Rosemary chili. And he'd stop by and have lunch with us and have a bowl of chili and rosemary chili, and he loved her salad. Yeah, and
What a great story.
yeah, and so we got to know, and he'd charm her. Oh man, those ladies, he'd charm her socks right off of them, man. I mean, they just love him. And so, you know, like I said before, I did have a chance to know him pretty well.
Contrast Bryant and Nealon.
Oh.
In terms of personality, because you said something that Nealon, when he came into the room, everybody knew it. So is this a different type of art?
Well, except there was an exact parallel. I mean, when Bryant came in the room, it was the same situation. Both of them had the same electric personality. I got to know Bryant a little bit more on the social side than I did, of course, Nealon. I never did get to know him other than just seeing him on the field. But that, where their similarities were almost parallel. On the field, Nealon was all business and same way with Bryant. There was a little bit different in their personalities from a social standpoint, but philosophy-wise and field-wise, I wouldn't say very much difference at all. From a little bit that I knew. Now, you got to understand now that Nealon recruited me, but I never actually played under him because he went on active duty when I first went down there.
What offense was Bryant running with Pirelli? Was he running a split T, or was he running a T formation? Because Pirelli was such a great passer.
You mean when Pirelli was there?
Yeah.
Oh no, he wasn't running a split T. Split T didn't come about until it was coming in about at that time and everything. But he was running pretty much a standard T formation. Basically, they called it the Shaughnessy T out of the Chicago Bears where they generally run it. Pirelli was a skilled passer. I mean, he'd throw at footballs like a baseball. I mean, he threw a rope every time he threw the ball. But mostly with Pirelli he was a magician on hiding the ball. I mean, he would do things with his hands that there's things you just didn't teach, you know. I mean, he just, I guess you could teach it, but he was the guy that mostly invented it, I guess, and made it work so much. I mean, the business, I don't know whether you ever saw him play very much, but I've seen him play where he'd run a bootleg and he'd stand back there for 3 or 4 seconds without moving a muscle. You know, people running all around him. He's standing with the ball sitting there behind his hip. And, you know, a lot of times they'll do it for a while, but he'd stand there and just look you right in the eye. You know, it's like, what's happening? And because he had that skill. I met him once because I had a very, very close friend that played up there. He was a year behind me he played at Male High School, and he was a year and a half behind. They had half years sometimes in public school at the time. He was a year and a half or 2 years behind me in high school, and he played for Bryant up there. And then afterwards, and after Bryant left, you know, they had what they call the club called the K Club, and they were all Kentucky lettermen, and they would have a reunion every year. And even though Bryant was at A&M or Alabama, he'd come up for that reunion. And it was back during my early days in the photography business, and they had me to go photograph that thing. And so I got to be pretty much a UK pseudo alumni guy, that thing. And those guys, they said when Bryant was, most of them always said at one time or other they wanted to kill Bryant, but after it was all over with, they loved him. So anyway, Bryant was a character like you don't see out every day.
So you said you met Paulie. Was that where you met him?
Just to say, not in any way where I could, he would remember anything. Just at one of the just a casual meeting where my friend introduced me to Paulie because he played with him and I was his friend.
How about George Blanda? Did you meet George Blanda?
Blanda was somebody I would never met George Blanda. Of course, he was after Paulie, and I can't really find any circumstances. I know I never met him, but what a professional he turned out to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
my memory of Paulie, I was a great fan of his as a collegian, but later in the professional ranks, and I always had heard that he and Bryant were almost matches of each other in terms of Paulie's offensive mind and Bryant's defensive mind were, and I'd heard stories that when they were at Texas A&M, they would meet together and sit, and Paulie's offense would go against Bryant's defense and things like that. Paulie had a great mind for football.
Yeah, that's true. Now, I lost track of him, to tell you the truth. After he got out, he played, I don't know how many years. He didn't play very many years as a pro, as I remember.
He did not play in the NFL, then he played in the AFL, and he played up and through Namath in the late 60s. He retired about 68 or 69. He played in one of the Super Bowls as a placeholder for Namath.
Yeah, okay.
But he was one of those players that was kind of blacklisted in the NFL by the system that would
That's what I was trying to. I knew there was something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He sat on the bench for a whole lot of years.
Yeah.
Because they wouldn't trade him.
Yeah.
Green Bay.
Yeah.
Same with Blanda. Blanda did the same thing with the Bears. He was playing with Hallis, and Hallis didn't want anybody else to have him, but he really didn't use him that much. I mean, it's untold what Blanda would have done had he played his whole career.
Yeah. Well, and then he played out at San Francisco at Oakland.
At Oakland, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Kentucky has a great heritage as far as football, but so does U of L.
Absolutely.
So did U of L, yeah. Maybe not as many, but the quality was about the same.
Well, let's talk a little bit about. You've mentioned Paul Hornung, so let's start into Paul Hornung. Talk to us a little bit about Hornung, and you've got a lot of stories about him, I know.
Yeah, the kid. The first time I ever saw him, I don't know exactly how he got, whether they actively went after him at Flaget. There was some recruiting that went on, but they kept me out of it. And so I don't know exactly how it was that Hornung got there. Let me just tell you a little bit before we get into that, about the recruiting thing. There was a fierce recruiting going on between St. X and Flaget. And they tried to, they tried all kinds of things. They'd say, hey, like anything west of 18th Street would be Flaget guys, and anything east of that would be St. X guys. as far as athletes were concerned, you know, and there was all kinds of things like that went on. But there was a period of time, there were a couple of times there were, we did actually went after guys that weren't out of the grade school Catholic system. There were guys that were, a good many of them played football. You're familiar with a thing called the Cabbage Patch? Mm-hmm. A settlement thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, they had some great football players that came out of there, and they had me into, you know, to see some of those. And the Flageteers, they had a book bank at the time, and we could offer a kid his books and his tuition. And when the Flageteers would pay the tuition, and we could offer that to the kid. Well, it all went about, and it was distasteful to me. For some reason, I just really just didn't like to go in and be bargaining with some eighth grade kid with a runny nose. I mean, that kind of, you know. And it's one time I was talking to this kid, and I can't even think of what his name was, but he was out of the Cabbage Patch, and a really, really good athlete. And I told him, I said, you know, we'd love to have you come down to Flaget and play for us down there. And he said, well, you know, what can you do for me? And I said, well, we can take care of your tuition, and I can get most of your books for you. And well, he said, what about lunch money? And boy, this is a new one on me, you know. Right off the bat, I start. Every thought that I had was starting to get pink and on the way to being red, you know. And it kind of took me, and I didn't quite understand, you know, this was completely foreign to me about the lunch money. Well, then before I could even say anything about that, and not only lunch money, but he thought that he ought to have some kind of remuneration to get to school back. And he said something, well, somebody will give me this amount of money to get back in school. And then I got up and I said, well, you by God better take it. I said, because if you show up down Flaget, I'm going to run you ragged. Well, I don't know what it was. I really got up. And the next thing I know, I'm up, Paulie's got me up, and what in the world did you say? And I said, I don't remember what I said really, but I said, I found myself bargaining with a running nose, 14-year-old kid. I'm bargaining with him. And I said, I'm not about to do it. And he says, okay, we won't have you do that anymore. So I really wasn't involved with a whole bunch of things like that. I'm not exactly sure about it. Hornung was just a kid from the West End, down in Portland down there. And he probably pretty much came to Flaget because Flaget was down there, you know. And of course we were a pretty good reputation by that time. We had a couple of well, we had one state championship behind us and a whole bunch of runners-up, you know. And so, the first time I remember him was when his freshman year. And, you know, gangly kid, he couldn't seem to get comfortable. And he'd always come out of a huddle or something, and he'd be shaking, you know, everything like that. Skinny, tall, and he played on the freshman team. And then coming into, let's see, in 1950, he was on the JV and played on the varsity too, or he was on the varsity, and he was just a little bit over 14 years old. So he's actually a year behind everybody. I don't know how that came about, but he was younger by a year of everybody else. And he said, this is the year we won a state championship in '49, and this was the next year. And we were having our troubles. I mean, we were winning all right, but everything was a struggle. And it came up to our first city game. That was against Manual. And it was a miserable night. Oh, rain. Oh, you couldn't believe it. It was raining so hard. Mud and every other kind of thing. And we had two kids that were pretty much even as far as the quarterback was concerned, and both of them were seniors, and we hadn't really got settled on either one of them really or anything. And we start the ball game off in the very first series of downs. We didn't go anywhere. The second series of downs, he fumbles the football. We lose the football, and managed to stop him and everything, and get the ball back a couple, and we put the other quarterback in. He fumbled football away, and there again we were fighting. We managed to keep him out of the end zone, so it was a nothing ball game. But we'd fumbled the ball twice in our own territory, and and Paulie says, "What do you think about putting a kid in?" And I said, I'm having my problems with trying to keep linemen, and I said, well, he can't do any worse, for crying out loud. What else can he do? And so anyway, they put Hornung in the game, and Hornung he ran the team for the rest of the game. We scored one touchdown. On about the third series of downs that Hornung was in there, we scored a touchdown on about a 40-yard run, where just a straight handoff, and we won a football game 6-0. And that was about the third game of the season, in his sophomore year, and he never looked back after that. That was the way his introduction came in the manager game, pressure ball game. And Hornung is, in addition to being such a great athlete, things just go well for Paul Hornung. Paul Hornung is a lucky guy. And, if a ball needs to sit and land and sit on its way on its nose like that and stay there, it'll do it for Hornung, And so that's the way he got started, of course. He started that third game of his sophomore year. And after that, he was right there for 3 years.
Did he have a reputation before he came to Flaget as being a great athlete, or could you see the possibilities in him?
You could see the possibilities. No, he was too young to have a great background or anything. Pretty much everything that he had all the abilities and everything, but it was all developed right there in high school. Okay. Great basketball player.
That's what I was going to say. He was a great basketball player.
Good baseball player. Good baseball player, basketball, and pressure meant nothing to him. It just didn't exist. Kid was just very confident of everything he did. And of course, he had a tough background, I've never to this day. I ran into him about a month ago, and from a time in 1950 up till his present time, I never ever heard him ever mention his father. His father ran off from him or something or other, when he was 7 or 8 years old. And he grew up, without a daddy. And his mother was a wonderful person, a great lady. And he was very devoted to his mother. And but he had a lot of things going against him, from a very modest background and no dad, to come up with, he just had highly intelligent, great student, and he didn't have to work on it. There wasn't a thing where he had to pound at it, he just got it.
Got it.
Yeah. And so I don't really. Most of his abilities became manifest from down at Flaget. Before that, he was a good grade school kid. But he really exploded when he got down.
Natural leader, Jim. Natural leader. Did everybody follow him, or did he command by what he did?
Yeah, but they would follow him, but as far as I know, he was never ever designated He was never the team captain of any of the sports down there that I know of. Somebody else always was that. But yeah, he was a very dominant personality. The thing that you had to remember so much about Paulie, he could do anything. And you used to have to watch him at school down there. You'd be running scrimmages or down there. We used to use a technique, what we used to call half-line scrimmage, where you'd have a center and a right side of the line, and you'd keep running everything to that one side, so that you just wouldn't have a whole team and watch at the same time. When you have one coach or something, or a couple of coaches, you didn't have watch everything. You could just watch one side. And we used to run a lot of half-line scrimmage, and you'd have to watch him. He'd slip in there on be playing linebacker, or he'd be doing a down lineman a couple of them if you'd watch him, if you wouldn't let him. If you wouldn't watch him, he'd be over there on defense playing. And so, like I said, he could do anything. And in grade school, he was a good kid. Never in any trouble or anything like that. He after his senior year, back in those days, we had spring practice, and back in those days, like I said, we had spring practice, and after his senior year, I had that senior year would have been, I had a chartreuse Ford convertible back then. And he'd come out, we'd be having spring practice, and he'd go in the locker room and go in there and get the keys in my car. And he'd take my car. And he'd have it all full of those high school girls down there, and I know Rosemary was always getting somebody call. Well, hey, Jim, what's her husband doing running around with a whole car full of girls? It'd be horny. It'd be horny. He'd have he's very forward along those lines.
I imagine so.
Yeah.
The golden boy.
Yeah, golden boy, yeah.
Yeah. Did he have brothers and sisters?
No, he was the only child.
Okay.
He's the only child.
I never heard of any.
Oh yeah, I'm positive he was an only child. Yeah. And all of a sudden you said, well, I had to kind of think for a second there.
Yeah.
Because
Well, I've never
sure
heard of
the only
any.
child.
You'd think that
Yeah.
you would have.
And he kind of, a fellow by the name of Hoffman, a kind of a financial guy around, kind of took him under his wing and helped out a lot of things. He did a lot of decisions, business decisions and things like that later on, and helped him out when he was at Notre Dame and everything. So yeah, he's just one of those lovable rogues, I guess you want to say. Later on, when he was a bad one when he was in Green Bay. I mean, boy, they do just about anything you could do up there. He and what is that end that they?
Well, I know exactly.
At end and guard up there, that were, I can't think of their names right now. That they were thick as they could be, and they thought they'd do anything.
Max McGee.
Max McGee. Yeah, with McGee, and I'm trying to think of what that big lineman was.
Maybe Fuzzy Thurston, was that?
Thurston was one. Yeah, that's not the one.
That's not the one, though. I know you talk about somebody else at guard.
Kramer. Was there
Jerry Kramer.
Yeah, Kramer. Yeah.
Well, let's hold up right there.